Welcome back to Rooted and Reasoned, where faith meets thoughtful inquiry.
Yeah.
This is episode 10 of our series.
Oh.
Does God exist?
Yeah.
And today, we're taking a deep dive into a question that can be really tough.
Yeah.
Especially when you see or experience difficult things in life.
Right.
If God is all-loving and all-powerful,
Yeah.
why is there so much evil and suffering in the world?
That's a big one.
Yeah.
It's a huge question.
It is a huge question.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up because even philosophers thousands of years ago were wrestling with this very question.
Right.
Take Epicurus, for instance.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of him.
Have you?
But honestly, I don't really know much about his ideas.
Okay.
What did he say about all of this?
Well, Epicurus basically argued that if God is truly good and powerful, he wouldn't allow suffering to exist.
Right.
And since suffering clearly exists, well, Epicurus concluded that God must not be real.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, it is.
It seems pretty simple on the surface, but I feel like there's got to be more to it than that.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
There are actually some hidden assumptions in Epicurus's argument.
Okay.
He assumes that God could create any kind of world he wanted. But what if God wanted a world where people have genuine free will?
Right.
The ability to make their own choices.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
If God just programmed us to be good all the time, would we really be free? It'd be like watching a movie.
Yeah.
Where you already know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Kind of takes the excitement out of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Think about it. Could you force someone to be good?
No.
And that kind of defeats the whole purpose of being good, doesn't it? It would be like trying to make a square circle.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
So maybe a world without any suffering isn't actually possible if God wants us to have real choices.
Right.
Real freedom.
Exactly.
It's a bit of a trade-off, I guess.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
Another assumption Epicurus makes is that God would automatically want a world without any suffering.
Okay.
But is that really something we can know for sure? Think about it. You go through some tough things sometimes, right?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you study hard for a test, but you still don't get the grade you wanted.
Yeah.
Or maybe you've had to say goodbye to a pet you loved.
Right.
These things are hard, but sometimes they make you stronger and help you grow.
Yeah. I've definitely had experiences like that. Sometimes the things I thought were the worst things that could happen to me actually turned out to be opportunities to learn and become a better person.
Exactly. So maybe, just maybe, God allows certain kinds of suffering for reasons we can't fully grasp right now. Maybe it's, like you said, a chance to grow.
Yeah.
Or to learn something we couldn't have learned any other way.
That's interesting. So it's not just a matter of God being unable or unwilling to stop suffering.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a bigger picture that we just don't have the perspective to see yet.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
Now, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And explore what the Bible has to say about all of this.
Okay, yeah.
The Bible doesn't shy away from the reality of suffering. It actually addresses it head on.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Like when I read about Job losing everything, his family, his possessions, his health, it really resonated with me because it felt so real, so honest about the pain people go through.
That's a powerful example. And if you look at Isaiah chapter 5, verses 8 and 9, it says that God's thoughts and ways are higher than ours.
What does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like God's thoughts are literally floating above our heads.
Not quite.
Okay.
It's more like saying that God's understanding is on a whole other level.
Gotcha.
Think of it like this. Imagine you're standing at the bottom of a mountain looking up, while God is at the top looking down.
Okay.
You only see a small part of the landscape, while he sees the whole thing.
Okay, I get it. God has a much wider perspective than we do.
Right.
So maybe he sees reasons for allowing suffering that we just can't comprehend from our limited viewpoint.
Exactly.
Okay.
And, you know, the Bible also talks a lot about free will.
Okay.
For example, Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19, and Joshua chapter 24, verse 15, both highlight that God gives us a choice to follow him or not.
Okay. So we're not just puppets on a string. We actually have a say in how our lives unfold.
That's right.
Wow.
We have genuine agency. God doesn't force us to love him or to obey him. He gives us the freedom to choose, and that freedom comes with responsibility.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But if we have free will and we make bad choices, does that mean God just sits back and watches things fall apart?
Not at all. The Bible is filled with stories of God working in the midst of suffering, even using difficult situations to bring about good.
Really?
Remember the story of Joseph?
Yeah, the one whose brothers sold him into slavery.
That's right.
Always felt so bad for him.
It's definitely a tough story. But even though Joseph went through horrible things, God used that experience to eventually save many lives.
Wow.
Including the lives of his brothers who had betrayed him.
Oh, wow.
As Joseph said to them in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives."
Wow. So God can actually bring good out of even the most painful situations.
He can.
That gives me hope.
It should.
Yeah.
And remember, Jesus himself experienced suffering in a way that we can't even imagine.
Yeah.
He was mocked, beaten, and ultimately crucified.
That's always been hard for me to understand. Why would God allow his own son to suffer so much?
It's a mystery for sure.
Yeah.
But in John chapter 16, verse 33, Jesus tells his disciples that they will face trouble in this world. But he also offers them hope. Take heart. I have overcome the world.
So even though suffering is a part of life,
Yeah.
it's not the end of the story.
Exactly.
Right.
And the Bible promises a future where suffering will be completely wiped away.
Really?
Revelation chapter 21, verse 4 describes a time when there will be no more death, mourning, crying, or pain.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
It does, doesn't it? And it reminds us that this present world, with all its brokenness and pain, is not the final chapter.
That's good.
Right.
Yeah.
We have something to look forward to.
Yeah.
There's hope.
Definitely.
Yeah.
For sure. It's kind of hard to wrap my head around, like on the one hand, we have free will and we make bad choices that lead to suffering.
Right.
But on the other hand, God has this bigger plan, this higher purpose that we can't always see.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex issue.
Yeah.
It's not about having all the answers neatly tied up in a bow. It's more about wrestling with these tough questions, digging deeper, and seeking understanding.
So it's okay to ask questions, even when those questions challenge what we believe.
Absolutely. Faith isn't about blind acceptance. It's about seeking truth, even if that means wrestling with doubts and uncertainties.
That makes me feel a lot better, actually. Sometimes it feels like you're not supposed to doubt,
Right.
Like doubting means you don't have enough faith.
That's a common misconception.
Yeah.
But in reality, doubts can actually strengthen your faith.
Really?
They can push you to examine your beliefs more closely,
Okay.
to dig deeper into scripture, and to seek answers with more sincerity.
It's like those tough workouts you do to build muscle.
Yeah,
It hurts in the moment, but it makes you stronger in the long run.
that's a great analogy. And remember, you're not alone in this.
Yeah.
Countless people throughout history have wrestled with the problem of evil and suffering. Even the greatest theologians and philosophers have grappled with these questions.
Oh, wow. That's actually kind of comforting to know.
It is, isn't it?
It's like we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Trying to make sense of a world that can sometimes feel really messed up.
We are. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to share our struggles, and to support each other in our search for truth.
Okay, so after taking this deep dive into all of this, what stands out to you the most? What's the biggest takeaway for you?
For me, it's the reminder that God's ways are higher than ours. We may never fully understand all the reasons for suffering in this world, but we can trust that God sees the bigger picture. And that's where faith comes in.
Okay.
It's about trusting in God's wisdom and goodness, even when we don't understand his ways.
That's a powerful reminder.
Yeah.
Especially when you're going through a tough time and it feels like God is distant or silent.
Yeah.
Knowing that he has a plan, even if we can't see it, is a huge source of comfort.
It really is. And that trust, that faith, it doesn't mean ignoring the pain
Okay.
or pretending that everything is okay.
Yeah.
It's about acknowledging the reality of suffering while also clinging to the hope that God is with us through it all.
So we're not supposed to just grit our teeth and bear it.
Not at all. It's okay to grieve, to lament, to cry out to God in your pain. The Psalms are full of examples of people doing just that.
Right.
Remember, even Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus.
Yeah.
He understands our pain because he experienced it firsthand.
That makes me think of that verse in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, that says that God works all things together for good for those who love him. It's hard to believe that sometimes, especially when you're in the middle of something awful. But stories like Joseph's remind us that God can bring beauty out of ashes.
Exactly. And ultimately, the Bible promises a future where suffering will be no more.
Right.
In Revelation chapter 21, verse 4, it describes a time when God will wipe away every tear from our eyes.
Wow.
There will be no more death, mourning, crying, or pain.
Wow, that gives me chills just thinking about it. It's like a reset button for all the hurt and brokenness in the world.
It's the ultimate hope.
Yeah.
The promise of a new creation where everything will be made right.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the existence of evil and suffering doesn't automatically disprove God's existence.
That's right. It's more about recognizing the tension between our limited human perspective and God's infinite wisdom and love.
That's a really helpful way to think about it. It's like God is saying to us, trust me, I've got this, even though it doesn't make sense to you.
Exactly. And you know that trust doesn't mean we just passively accept suffering.
Okay.
It means we can fight against injustice, comfort those who are hurting, and work towards creating a world where suffering is less prevalent.
So even though suffering is a part of life in this broken world, we're not powerless against it.
Absolutely not. We can choose to be agents of healing and hope, reflecting God's love and compassion in tangible ways.
That's a really empowering message.
Yeah.
It's like we're called to partner with God in bringing about his kingdom, even in the midst of all the messiness and brokenness.
That's a beautiful way to put it. We're not just spectators in this cosmic drama.
Right.
We're active participants, invited to join God in his redemptive work.
You know, it's funny, before this deep dive, I thought the whole problem of evil thing was just a philosophical puzzle. But talking it through like this makes it feel so much more real, so much more personal.
Yeah, it's the power of engaging with these questions authentically, allowing them to connect with our own experiences and struggles.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, what would you say to someone like a teenager?
Yeah.
Who's going through a really tough time right now, maybe dealing with a loss, or something that feels totally unfair? What encouragement could you offer them?
I think the first thing I'd say is it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling.
Don't try to bottle it up or pretend that everything is okay. God created you with emotions. And he's big enough to handle your anger, your sadness, your confusion.
That's so important. Sometimes it feels like we're supposed to have it all together, especially as Christians.
Yeah.
But that's just not realistic.
Right. It's okay to not be okay sometimes.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's also important to remember that you're not alone in this.
Right.
Reach out to someone you trust, someone who can listen and support you. Talk to your parents, a youth leader, a friend, a counselor.
Yeah. Sharing your burdens with someone else can make a huge difference.
It does.
It's like that verse in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2 that says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ.
Exactly. And don't forget that God is with you in your pain. He sees your tears.
Yeah.
He hears your cries, and he cares deeply about what you're going through.
It's hard to remember that sometimes when it feels like God is silent or distant.
Yeah.
But the Bible is filled with examples of God showing up in unexpected ways, even in the darkest of times. That's right. And you know, sometimes the way God shows up is through other people, through their acts of kindness and compassion.
So we can be God's hands and feet in the world, offering comfort and hope to those who are hurting.
Beautifully said. And remember, even though suffering can feel overwhelming at times, it doesn't have the final word. God's love is bigger than any pain, any loss, any injustice.
And the Bible promises a future where suffering will be no more.
Yes.
That gives me hope, even on the toughest days.
Me too. Cling to that hope. Hold on to it tightly and let it be a source of strength and comfort for you.
That's a great reminder for all of us, no matter what we're facing. So the next time you encounter suffering in your own life or in the world around you, try to remember that God might have a bigger plan at work, even if you can't see it yet.
Yeah.
And even though you don't always understand, you can trust that he's with you through it all. That wraps up another deep dive here on Rooted and Reasoned. If you found this conversation helpful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Until next time, keep seeking truth and reasoning together.